Hi there, John Moore here, and I am a teacher of shamanism. That means I guess it means I teach shamanism. I am also a certified hypnotherapist and a certified meditation teacher. And today I'd like to talk to you about doing shadow work. I want to talk about what is the shadow. I want to talk about why we might want to work on our shadow. And I'm going to give you some instructions for getting started. So this is a video for absolute beginners. You don't have to have any background knowledge. I'm not going to be focused on shamanism in this video, so you don't have to practice shamanism or even be interested in shamanism to get a significant amount of benefit from following the instructions I'm going to give you in this video. First of all, what is the shadow? If you might be curious, you might have Googled what is the shadow or shadow work or heard of shadow work or seen books about it or what have you. It's really quite simple. Our shadow, and this term comes from the psychoanalyst Carl Jung, I mean, not the word shadow, but it's used in this way, are the parts of ourselves, our wants, our beliefs, our desires, our drives, all of these things, our attitudes, all of these things that we have exiled into our unconscious, right? So, for example, let's say I have racist thoughts, right? And I'm like, oh, that's bad. I shouldn't have those thoughts, and I push those down into my shadow because, it's shameful. It's bad to have racist thoughts or whatever, and I don't address those. They're just back there somewhere. Those don't go away. They don't. Nothing we put into our shadow goes away. It's like having a giant closet that you cram stuff into. It isn't gone, it's still there. And at some point, your closet might explode. So, there's all kinds of, beliefs, ideas, thoughts, things that have been sort of shamed out of us. So, it could be things like maybe I'm very, I'm a male and I was raised in a patriarchal society with, surrounded by toxic masculinity. But maybe I wanted to do something like flower arranging or, be a stay-at-home dad or something like that. And those things, when I was growing up, might not have been culturally acceptable for a straight male. It might not have been seen as masculine. So I might have repressed those ideas, those thoughts, those desires to gain acceptance from a father figure or culture at large or what have you. So, but those parts of us, we're not really aware of them, and that's the problem. So our shadow parts, if you've ever taken a ball, like a rubber inflatable ball, and tried to shove it underwater, right? What happens? You might be able to get it underwater for a second, but it's going to pop back up. And you don't know where it's going to go when it pops back up. And that's the problem with our shadow parts. They come out unexpected ways, that sort of thing. So can result in, depression and anger episodes and, just a feeling of being disconnected and all kinds of stuff. Conflicts in relationships is a big one. It's a big, huge one. My shadow stuff drives your shadow stuff crazy. Okay. Triggers, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Triggers are a big indicator that there's shadow material there that hasn't been addressed. So it should be a little clear why we might want to address our shadow parts, these parts that we have repressed. First of all, they're parts of ourselves. Whether or not we like them, whether or not, whatever, it's part of self-acceptance to understand, gosh, I have these thoughts and I have desires, and where do they come from? That doesn't mean we have to adopt them, right? So, for example, if I had violent thoughts towards somebody and I repressed that, bringing those up and examining those and integrating those and looking at those does not mean I'm going to act out violently towards that someone. And that's sort of the lie that keeps us from working on our shadow. That if I let this stuff up, I'm going to lose control. or I'm going to act out in ways that I could get arrested for, or I will be rejected by my loved ones for, or what have you. The real issue is here that you're already acting on your shadow parts, but you're doing it in a way that's not in control. You're not in control of the ways you act up. Have you ever done something and said, that's not like me, or had a reaction to something and wondered where that was coming from, or been triggered by something and like, I don't know why that triggers me so much? It's because that stuff is in your shadow and you don't have control over what you're not conscious of. So, part of the beginning of shadow work for beginners, is starting to become aware of what's in your shadow. And this is work not just for beginners. You can do this work for the rest of your life, probably, and maybe never get to the bottom of it. But this is work that has paid off significant benefits for me on my spiritual journey. And a benefit of doing the shadow work is, if you have any sort of inclination for doing spiritual development, you can develop so far. You can have all kinds of powers, or who knows whatever you want to call them, cities or whatever. But if you haven't cleaned up your shadow, that stuff really gets amplified. So we see that in spiritual leaders who wind up like abusing, starting cults or whatever, and abusing the people under them, or stealing money, or doing things dishonestly. Really often there's sexual abuse there. Human beings are sexual creatures. We have sexual desires. I don't care who you are. I don't care, if you identify as asexual, that's totally fine. But to say that you've never had any sort of sexual feeling or desire is untrue. Even just hormonally growing up, that would have happened at some point. It's totally fine however you identify now, but there's usually a lot of sexual material that is inside our shadow as well. And I honestly think that this leads to, repressed loss of power, repressed sexual urges, that leads to a lot of violence. Again, this doesn't mean like recognizing sexual urges, recognizing that I'm a sexual creature doesn't mean I have to act out. On the contrary, it means I'm aware of what my drives are. I'm aware of what my desires are. And I can make conscious choices about them. Right. I can, we talk about the male gaze, and I was very proud of myself. I was attending a lecture with my girlfriend at one point, and there was a woman who was wearing giving the lecture, was wearing a very low cut blouse that wasn't well fitting, and I had to avert my eyes a lot of the time to keep from seeing stuff accidentally slipping out. And my girlfriend said to me, you're really in control of your of your sexuality, of your sexual desire. She's like, because I couldn't stop looking at her, like she was coming out and all of this stuff. And thank you first of all for that compliment, but I am aware that I am attracted to the female body. I'm a straight male, and I'm aware that I'm attracted to breasts, and that doesn't happen to be a big problem for me, because I know that I don't have to look at that. I'm not going to be unconsciously drawn to something that might have seemed like I was behaving inappropriately in that setting, or made somebody uncomfortable, or what have you. It doesn't mean the desires go away. It just means I have control over them, that I can choose what to do with those sexual desires, right? With the sexual feelings, the sexual thoughts, the associations. Shame is the major factor that causes us to push stuff down. Shame on you for being attracted to so-and-so. Shame on you for wanting so-and-so in your life. Shame on you for not being the mold of what your parents think you should be, or your grandparents, or your culture, or your school, or your siblings, or who cares, right? So there's a lot of shame. And that is one of probably the biggest factor that contributes to us sticking stuff into our shadow, and we're good at shaming ourselves. Okay, so so knowing what it is, knowing that there are these parts in there, knowing that they can come up and cause us to act in ways we wouldn't choose to. um, uh, how do we begin to work on these parts of ourselves? Because we're not conscious of them yet, right? So the first part of shadow work, and this is the part I'll focus on in this video, is starting to become aware of what's there. Once you bring these things out into the light, they don't have as much power over you anymore. You start to clean them up, or they clean up kind of naturally. And by cleaning up, it doesn't mean they go away. Again, I'm not going to, by being aware, gosh, I feel attracted to so and so. That's not going to stop. It just means I'm not going to unconsciously ogle that person, or something's not going to slip out of my mouth that is inappropriate, or I'm not going to have these unconscious behaviors that come up and where I shock myself with something I've done, or do something that would be inappropriate. So it's about recognizing and accepting who you are, right? We have this thought. There's this pervasive shaming thought out there, that good people don't have bad thoughts, and that thoughts are bad. Thoughts are things, and thoughts are bad. There's only a hint of truth in that, and I'll do another video another time about cleaning up toxic thinking and toxic thoughts and that sort of thing. But if somebody has done some wrong to me and really hurt me and that sort of thing, I may have a thought, gosh, I would like to hurt that person back, right? I'd like to do something back to that person. I'm not going to do that. But I'm aware of that. I'm aware of where it's coming from. I'm aware that it comes up. It's not going to hopefully slip out and then do something, where I would do something unconsciously or become reactive, right? Reactivity is the mode where we're just, not really in control of what we're doing. We're just reacting to stuff rather than responding to things, setting boundaries, calming ourselves down before we take action, being able to think things through. So there's some very good indicators about when we are in our shadow, working from a shadow part. One of those indicators is that your amygdala, which is a part of your brain that is responsible for fight and flight kind of responses, fear responses, that kind of gets turned on. And that isn't necessarily just this overwhelming sense of fear, but if you've ever lost your temper, where you're yelling at somebody and you cannot calm yourself down, that's your amygdala is completely switched on. It's opened up. You have been triggered at that point. So people use the word trigger a lot, and they kind of misuse it, and they use it to make fun of people, and okay, whatever. I won't judge that, but our triggers are keys into what's in our shadow. They're one key into what's in our shadow. I'll give you a couple others. So for beginners, this is a journal. This one smells really nice. It's a new journal, with and so I want you to keep a journal, and what you're going to put in here. So the first, one part of this, and you can, the format doesn't matter how you do this, whatever. But I want you to take a pen, and every time you feel triggered, which is anytime you get hot under the collar, or your emotions act up, or you get angry or like you have this like overwhelming fear, or something where the emotions are disproportionate maybe to the situation. An example might be somebody cut me off in traffic and I was fuming about it for 20 minutes, right? That's disproportionate to what just happened. Somebody cuts me off in traffic and I have an instant response like, oh my God, look at this guy just cut me off in traffic. That's understandable, but if I carry that with me and I'm angry and I'm like chewing on it and that sort of thing, That's disproportionate. It's going on for a long time. That's a good indicator. I've been triggered. I can't get out of my amygdala. There's something else going on for me. So you're going to start to write these things down as you go through your day. I suggest keeping a trigger journal for at least a month. Longer is better. You can keep it forever. That's totally fine too. And then going back and really reading the incident. So you want to write down, sort of the date and time, something about the incident. Guy cut me off in traffic, and how you reacted to it, how you felt about it, what you did, maybe how long it took you to get out of that space. And this is going to start to give you some hooks into where your triggers lie, where your unconscious shadow parts lie. There's another sort of thing I'm going to have you write down that's going to be an excellent exercise for you. So another way the shadow comes up in us is through what's called projection, psychological projection. If you're not familiar with what psychological projection is, it's when I take something that kind of belongs to me, and I see that in other people, and I project my feelings about myself. It's safer for me to see them on somebody else than it is to look at myself, because it's shameful for me to look at myself. So if I, say I had a friend and they were always late, and I'm not a late person, but if I look at them and I'm like, look at that person, he's always late. He doesn't consider my feelings. He's inconsiderate, and I start piling stuff onto there. There's something in my shadow about that I'm projecting onto that person. Is that person really late? Because is the person inconsiderate? Maybe their behavior was, maybe, so things that are pet peeves for us about other people, things that bother us in other people. This is different than if somebody is actually causing you harm. If somebody is abusing you, or and that is in any way, any way that word works, right? So physically abusing you, mentally, emotionally, financially, whatever, abusing you, getting angry is probably appropriate, and setting some boundaries or taking action to get yourself out of that situation is incredibly important. So this exercise is not about spiritual bypassing, where you start to say, I am above being angry with these people. No, it's about recognizing the anger and trying to get a handle on where that's coming from. And this is the very first step to shadow work. This is shadow work for beginners. It's just to start to recognize what's there. Once you do, some of that stuff will come to light on its own. So, write those two things down. And the other thing I would say that might be important to write down during this time would be if you start having interesting, weird, or different dreams that you're not used to, right? Because our unconscious may start to speak to us once we start bringing this shadow material up and having a look at it. Our unconscious might start to speak to us and say, I'm going to show you a bunch of metaphors for you to start processing this material since you've opened the floodgates a little bit. No, there's a little bit of a caution here. And this goes for anything. If for some reason you are doing any sort of spiritual, psycho-spiritual work, and you start to have overwhelming emotions or thoughts of self-harm in any way, or thoughts of harming others that, not just like, I'd really like to punch that guy in the face, but I'm gonna go punch that guy in the face. Like thoughts of harming yourself or others, or overwhelming emotions, it's time to seek help. If it's an emergency, call emergency services where you live, or suicide hotline, or what have you. If it's not an emergency, if it's not an emergent situation, but you're just being overwhelmed with the feelings, it's time to seek some therapy. If you don't have a therapist, if you do have a therapist, talk to them about what's coming up for you. So this has been just a really short talk, about 20 minutes, about the shadow, about shadow work, and how as a beginner you might start to do some of the work. Now, there are a lot of shamanic practices and a lot of other spiritual practices, a lot of books out there about doing shadow work, and there are psychotherapists and shamanic practitioners who have training in doing shadow work, it might be worthwhile to seek one out at some point, after you've done a little bit of self work, if you feel like you're stuck, any of those things. But awareness is the first step. Awareness is always the first step. I hope this has been helpful. I hope this helps you step forward on your journey towards spiritual wholeness, fulfillment, health, and happiness. Subscribe to my channel. I've got lots more stuff coming up, and I will talk to you real soon.